Hello and welcome to this brief tutorial on utilizing Labelbox's Python SDK to create and work through a text data export. I've gone ahead and installed the necessary dependencies and packages here, and I've also grabbed a project ID for a project that has completed labels on text data. In addition, I've input my API key, which I use to establish my client, and I've grabbed this project, which I input the ID for right here, and stored it in my project variable. In order to create our export, I'm going to call the label generator method on this project object, and I'm going to store the result of this in our labels variable. Let's also note here the export format that was formerly used was project.export labels. This will still work if you want to run it this way. And we can also create an export with start and end filters, which will only generate an export of labels created between the dates that I input here inclusively. So I'll run this cell here and give it a moment to generate our export. And after a few seconds, my export has completed. So the next thing I can do is optionally convert this export to a label list, which is great for small to medium-sized exports because it will be more convenient to work through than what the label generator creates, although a tad less memory efficient. We can follow the link here to read about these differences. So I'll call the asList method on our labels object here and store this again in the labels variable just to replace it. And this is just a note about a drop-down deprecation, so we don't need to worry about this. And now we can dig into viewing the contents of this export. So in the label variable here, singular, I'm going to ask to see the first label in this labels list by using the next method. And I'm going to ask to see the contents of this label. And as we can see here in the label object, we have a variety of fields, including the unique label ID, the data here, which is our text data, and a link to view that data row, the contents of that data row. And we also have all the annotations that comprise this label, shown as object annotation objects, which include fields for name, feature schema ID, color, feature ID, value, etc. So we see here I have a headline, and in addition, we have a name. So these are entities that I've labeled within my text data, and there's a good amount of object annotations here in this label. And lastly, at the end here, we can see other fields relevant to the label, including our created at field, our updated at field, seconds to label, and various quality analysis measurements, amongst other information. So there's a ton of stuff you can grab here just on a single label export. In this next cell here, we're just demonstrating how to grab these fields if we want to work on them or view them. So I can ask on this label object here to see the UID. I can call into the extra field and then grab the created by or created at or media type value by parsing through this dictionary, passing the key to return the value, or I can also see the reviews. So as we see here, neatly printed out, I have various information that I wanted to attain for this label that we were looking through above. And if I want to view a list of my annotations that comprise this label, I can call for the annotations field here, and we see neatly printed out the 5 object annotations that we were scrolling through above and the various information we went over. Finally, we can grab objects of this first annotation right here by asking for the 0th index of this annotations field object. And we can ask for the name once we grab this index, or the feature schema ID, or the start and end indice of the entity, or any nested classifications. So we see here it's a headline. We have the schema ID for the headline object. We have the start and end indices, and there's no nested classifications. So this is just a demonstration of how we can attain the information that comprises an individual annotation. Lastly, we can utilize the ND-JSON converter to turn annotation objects, which we were looking at right here, into ND-JSON, which can be easier to parse through and also prepares us for a potential upload back into Labelbox if we're looking to iterate on our projects. So I'm going to run the ND-JSON converter here and pass in that labels list that I created above and store it in this annotations variable. And if I wish to view the first annotation ND-JSON, we can follow the same procedure we did to view the first label. And we see here we're looking at the same information in ND-JSON that we were here in this first annotation object. So we have the same feature schema ID, the same start and end indices. We can see the data row that this annotation has been made on, and a UUID for this annotation, all created and formatted neatly by the ND-JSON converter. Finally, we can grab elements of this ND-JSON annotation just by calling for the key in this dictionary of ND-JSON. So if I want to view the schema ID or say the ID for the data row, I can just ask for those keys, or I can go a couple levels deep here, and I can print back this information to view or work with however I desire. That's all for this tutorial. Thanks for watching.